Let's go ahead and get started. For guests and visitors, my name is Steve Perley, Club President, and I'd like to welcome you all to the 36th meeting of the 47th year of the Dublin Worthington Rotary Club. I've got a bit of good news and bad news, so we'll go with the bad news first. The lunch. Yeah, there was a mix-up at the provider. Nothing we did wrong, so I guess we're fasting today. There's also an assortment of chips back there if you would like. Sodas and waters, but it is what it is. Now, the good news is this is the last time we're going to be in this room. Hopefully, yeah. Next week we have a rah-rah, and then after that we are over at York. So details about the new location are going to be in the newsletter. But before I get ahead of myself, today's invocation and pledge of allegiance will be offered by George. Deer in headlights. Make it up.
Dear Lord, thank you for your presence in our life. And as we struggle with the war in our world and all the suffering that goes on, help us to understand and pray for peace. And as we listen to our speaker today, help us to understand a little bit more on each side. Thank you, Lord, for your presence. Amen.
Amen. Let's help with this. You guys see this, right? Yeah.
There.
And our flag was still there. There we go.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Teresa. So I will introduce, yes, visiting Rotarians. We have a visiting guest Rotarian, Emily. Thanks for coming. We will be introducing her to the club at our York first meeting, April 6th. Let's do the one side walking. 1, 3. And then we have another guest, Peggy, potential new member, soon to be new member.
Adrian Knowles, soon to be a member.
Good. Yeah, fantastic. The speaker, obviously, but George will introduce him a little bit.
Emily?
Yeah, I already talked about it. You're the program, yeah. All right, that takes us to our sergeant. Mr. Jerry Katz.
Respect.
Yes, sir.
Yay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Master Sergeant told me to get somebody to carry the pot. Let's see, who shall I pick on? No.
Not like that.
Thanks for being a sergeant.
Harry. Get out your $2. There's a $2 limit today. We're having a rah-rah later this month. We need the money. And before I collect happy dollars, I just want to tell you, today is National Melba Toast Day. So if you've ever been at a meal and you've toasted anybody or anything, put in $1. It's also Chip and Dip Day. I don't know what that really means, so we're not going to talk about it. It's also National Tamale Day. Now, if you can speak Spanish,
understand Spanish, or wish you could speak Spanish or understand it, put in $1. And lastly, and more importantly, actually, today is National Red Cross Donate Blood Today. So if you've ever seen blood, put in $1. Hopefully it wasn't just yours. Okay, now, happy dollars. Who's got a happy dollar that's so proud of it, they want to,
Alan Zink does on the screen.
Alan Zink has $1. Well, at least one.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to say that I'm happy to have had dinner last night with John Jacob and Marty and a group of other people from Worthington. So I owe $3.
Very good. Thank you. Any other happy dollars? Steve has.
I'm happy that we're not gonna be in here anymore because it's gonna be less work for me, and that means our club members are gonna come back and they're gonna be engaged and motivated and inspired and all of those things. That's what's gonna happen, and I'm gonna be happy about it.
Yeah. Just a master sergeant, think you had a happy dollar.
I'm just gonna give up my money.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's smart to do that.
Jerry,
Yes, Alan.
I'd like to volunteer one more $1. And it's because I'm happy because of having learned about the OWL meeting camera from Steve Pirely, and was able to introduce that idea to our condo community here, and our monthly meetings work much better by Zoom because we bought an OWL, and I was glad to be able to help with that. So thanks, Steve.
Good. We're excited that you're excited, Alan. Thank you.
That's fine.
He's already put in 3, so there's 4, so that's
Well,
enough.
I was hoping that we could get the OWL into use again there.
Well, we're thinking that through, actually, Alan. Any other happy dollars? Yes.
Yeah, my son-in-law's book, which just came out the end of January, is already in the second print.
What's the name of it?
Freestone Transforming Mission.
There you are. It's in the second printing. First printing was how many copies? 25?
No,
That went to,
no, I think it was about 5,000.
yeah,
So
yeah.
they were very surprised.
That's your story.
Jerry,
Okay.
could you repeat a little of that so we know what he said?
Yes, we will have him repeat it. Jim, they couldn't hear you, so you're gonna have to stand up.
Okay.
Speak up.
It's, he published a book, is in missionology at Pittsburgh Seminary. And it's called Freestone Transforming Church Mission.
Available on Amazon?
Available on it.
And available on Amazon. Alan, could you get that?
Some of it. We need
Okay.
the OWL.
Jim will send out a blast email. Increase sales. We got to get rid of the second printing. Or, you know.
I'll just put in another plug for the OWL.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, you're in line for the 3 jokes of the day. Why is Peter Pan always flying? He never lands.
Is that a joke?
That's good.
That's good, George. This one's for you. What do Santa's elves listen to while they work? Rap music. You ground, you pay. Why was the coach yelling at the vending machine?
as quarterback.
Thank you, Jared. I think Sue should get $1 back or something. All right, announcements. Make your way up here. First, I want to say we've got the food drive this weekend. If you are a captain, there's a bunch of signage. I had it already. Here we go. Got these brand new signs. Worthington Resource Pantry on one side, Dublin Food Pantry on another. They are reusable. Thank you to Andrew for putting these together. There's also a bunch of, like window signs and then pamphlets to hand out. So if you are a captain, please pick up some of this stuff. And there's also a sign-up sheet. We need 4 more spots. We need 2 captains and 2 more volunteers. So I'm going to pass this around. I told Andrew that we would figure out what to do if this is not completely filled out by the end of today. So please don't make me have that conversation. Let's pass this around. Here's a pen. Thank you. All right. Nick.
Thanks, Steve. So we, with our partnership with Slate Hill Elementary School, they are starting their state testing for grades 3, 4, and 5 next week. And the teachers have requested some good luck notes that they can pass out to the students. So I have lists of students available just outside the doors here, and plenty of note cards. You've got pens, and then sample notes. Just real quick, 1 sentence, good luck, knock it out of the park kind of note that those teachers can pass out to students. We would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. And if you have not already picked up your 3 go cards, by all means, please go do that. I don't see any reason why. I mean, it's a pretty short ask. We can all knock it out.
Something we can do right. Just finish today.
Yep. All right, Peggy.
Thank you, President Steve. This is my last day to promote our Kid Cancer Endowment. If you haven't had the opportunity to give so far, you can also let Jennifer know and she will put it on your bill. Or you can donate today. We would appreciate it very much. Just curiosity, how many people in this room has been touched by cancer? It doesn't discriminate. Babies, old folks, they all get it. So we're in the process again of raising money. We're well over the 225,000 mark. Your club to date has donated $600, and Steve and the board has agreed to match that. And I appreciate it very much. So if you find it in your heart to give today, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Jim?
Yep. Everyone should have received an email that this next month is our biggest fundraiser, which is, of course, the sponsorship drawings. We are again doing it online, so you register your tickets online with the specific names in the link that will be going out next week. Also, Jennifer will be sending you an invoice, and it will go on to your April billing. So everybody please sell or buy the 20 tickets assigned to you.
Jim, just a slight clarification. We're sending you an invoice for the $200 unless you prepaid part of it, and we expect you to pay that. If you do not pay that, we will put it on your April invoice, but you should pay the invoice as it comes. So appreciate that. Thank you.
It's 10 tickets, right?
10
10
10
at 20.
at 20.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim, and thank you for coordinating that effort. Let's see, looking through the list here. Just again, reminder, I'm not gonna stop talking about it. New meeting space. Last day in here, we're going to York in 2 weeks. Next week, we have a social, a rah-rah. It is at Zactic Brewery. Thank you to Katie and the social committee for putting that together. There should be light appetizers, I think. I've been told there's cannoli for the people that get there soon enough. It's a cool place, so I'm looking forward to seeing everybody out there. All right. Oh, and more details are in the newsletter. Everything's in the newsletter because we have a really great newsletter. So if you have questions, see me or ideally look at the newsletter. Okay, now we're ready for our program. Mr. George.
Today, would like to introduce Alan Lines. The title is Understanding Ukraine's Role in the US and Global Food Price Inflation. And also Russians and Ukraine's war brings into focus. Alan has been there in that part of Europe and Ukraine about 25 times over the period. He's retired now from Ohio State in the Department of Agriculture. And he and his wife have lived in that area and know it very well. And again, he's in the economic part of it. And I don't want to take any more time. Alan Lines. And we also had to put up with Dave Hansen or vice versa, but they were both in the same department, so.
Need help pinning that on?
If you would.
That should do it. Just a test.
Hey, yeah, all right.
Excellent.
I think you talk like
Throw this
that.
in your pocket,
Where do you want?
just in your pocket.
Just right there.
And then,
Whatever you say.
that's right. Left and right. That's all we need.
Okay. George, I've learned something, that you are part Ukrainian. I learned that when I was over there and I had to work through a translator. And I never knew what was going to come out the other side. So whenever I talk to George and we communicate, I never know what the next level is going to be in terms of what our conversation was. But the idea that I did learn something over there was I was talking about, profitability with these farmers and making some investments on these farms as they trying to become private farmers. And if I used the term, something like this, I said, when you're making an investment, sometimes your spirit is willing, but your flesh is weak. Now, I think you understand what I'm saying. And I used that in my conversation with these new farmers that didn't speak English. And after I was all done, this one farmer, a very quizzical look on his face, came up to me and he said, I don't know what you meant when you said the vodka's good, but the meat is bad. I looked at my interpreter. And she went like this. She said, you never used those terms before, and I did the best I could. So communication is a real task to make sure people understand what you're doing. But I came here today, I want to give you a choice at this point, as I would always do to my students. I've got something to say, but if you don't want to listen to it, we'll try to do what you want. And rest assured, I have loaded my academic manure spreader. And that'll be dressing
Ukrainian agriculture, trying to get you a sense of what it is. Or we can talk about the war in Ukraine. So what's your pleasure? A little bit of both? And I have a tendency, like most professors, to talk too much. So what I want to do is really give you what I think is a foundation for understanding why Ukraine is such an important part of our world food system. I'm sure that you know a lot about Ukraine from watching your TV screen. So as let's see, how do I enter to get this thing next?
Right.
Page,
Arrows.
arrows down, arrows up, right?
Nope, other arrows right.
Arrow right, there you go. You know, so some of you, you've seen these maps on the TV over and over and over again, but here's Ukraine. It's the biggest land mass of any quote unquote European nation. And it really is pretty critical. It's a piece that really is, what do they do, down or up?
Right.
And what I want to begin with is give you an understanding of why it is such an important piece of real estate in the world. Here's a little gauge here, and this is the worst soil in the world, and this is the best soil in the world. Look where it is. In terms of two things, how it performs and how it can recover when it's abused. But if you look up here in the Ukraine area, right up in here, you see here, you see a little bit down in here. And if you look at Ukraine in that aspect, Ukraine has 25% of the best soil in the world. 25% of the best soil. Even though this is green over here, this green over here is much, much better. If you take a farmer from Illinois or Iowa over there and park them in these fields, tears would come to their eyes. It's that much better. And it's formed differently than these soils. This is prairie soils, but there's a lot of less soils when they blew in from the west. Over here, you have anywhere from, it goes out to the edge, yes, it's thin in some areas. They're called Chernism soils. These are not Chernism soils. And the reason these are Chernism soils is there was never enough moisture, if you will, and it was too cold to degrade the organic matter. And all it could do was grow grass for millions of years. Grass grows, falls down, grass grows, falls down. And you get anywhere from 6 to 8 inches on the edge of this very good soil to someplace where it might be 20 to 30 feet deep. And it responds well to technology. So keep in mind that Ukraine holds 25% of the best soil in the world. And as a land resource, as you think of Ukraine, think about how big it is. It looks small on that map, yes. But if you take all of these states together, and add them up in terms of square miles, it fits. Takes all of those 5 states to fill up that area of Ukraine. And of that area, 72% of it's ag, and then 56% of that is really arable land in Ukraine. Look at this map, and it gives you an idea. You know how distant it is from New York to Chicago. That's how big Ukraine is from the east to the west. But there's another element. If you think about it, where we live is out here in Ohio, but if we move the edge of it, couldn't find a map that would do it, but if we move the edge of that over to Route 71, which is kind of the eastern edge of the Corn Belt. The western end of Ukraine would be sitting in the eastern part of Nebraska. Okay, so think about that, but then there's another piece to that puzzle in terms of understanding it. Where does it sit on a latitude basis? Here's the lower part of what is Ukraine. It's at the 45 degrees. The bottom part of Ukraine is at 45. What latitude do we sit on here in Columbus? 40. So everything is north there. And it's cold. And that was part of the reason that organic matter couldn't degrade, because it was too cold. Looking at it another way, to give you a better perspective yet, look at Ukraine, where it's located, and here's the 40th here, here's 60. Move Ukraine along this line and you see where it sits then, right up in here. North, a lot of it summits in Minnesota, but a lot of it sits north of Minnesota in Canada. Yet, they are growing corn like we do in Ohio. Think about that for a minute. Let me see what this next, okay. Oops, back. And what I want you to remember is this. My mind takes me back to when I was a student at Purdue, listening to a professor one day come into class, talking to us about farm policy. Carol Bottom was his name. And he was all excited. And we could tell he was excited, but we couldn't figure out what it was all about. So we finally asked him, and he said, you know, I got the report on my home farm, and I'm still farming back in South Dakota. And we planted corn, and our yield was just tremendous. I got 30 bushels to the acre. Okay. So now what we're talking about is take South Dakota, compare it to Ohio 40, 50 years ago. And Ohio was part of the Corn Belt. South Dakota wasn't. But now South Dakota produces more corn than the state of Ohio, because of all of the changes that have taken place in the production of corn, technology, genetics, the whole ball of wax. And they are a more dominant state than Ohio in corn production. And they sit way up there. So keep these things in mind. And what's happening now is the fact that since Ukraine broke off in 1991 from the Soviet Union, it had the opportunity, the farmers there had the opportunity to learn how to grow corn the way they do in Ohio. Due to the efforts of people like Dave Hansen going all over the world and encouraging them to look at these kinds of changes that are taking place in agricultural production. There's that land. And it goes on forever. You know, there could be fields like this that might be 3,000 acres in one field. And look at, if you get up here close, you see the organic matter, the darkness, that's that churnism soil I was talking about. It's very, very valuable soil in the world's food system. Look at what's happened in Ukraine, even back in 2000, 20 years ago. Growing 3 million acres of corn, now they're producing something like 13 million acres of corn. Look at the yield that they've changed. And does anybody know what the average yield was in Ohio this last year? About 175. And many farmers produced more than 200 bushels per acre. And there's an element of these private farmers, these agribusiness farmers, that are learning how to do this because they're now weren't under the thumb of the old Soviet system. And soybeans, not as much, but you can see what the same pattern has been. Learning to use technology that was available. Corn production, where is it in Ukraine? Up in this part, this is where those good soils are. And they spread around, but here's the, right in here is the real best of those soils. And that's why that's where most of the corn is produced. Other big crops, whereas the sunflowers produced, that's the other big crop in Ukraine. It's down in here. Remember, when the Soviet Union was there, controlling everything, they really were, it was considered the breadbasket because of this, was the wheat production. And where this was now, in terms of wheat is produced all over. In the natural environment, there's a moisture gradient that runs like this. More moisture over here, less moisture here, because of the mountains out in this part, in Carpathian Mountains. There's a temperature gradient that runs from here up because of the latitude difference. So there's lots of things going on there, and they are good farmers. But I think to understand Ukrainian agriculture, you've got to recognize that there are three groups of farmers that come out in this large area with these good soils. There's rural farmer villages, there's private farmers, and there's agri-holding companies. And these are the people, these companies are in the act of taking
Recording in progress.
all of those good soils that we saw in that picture. Rural villages, private farmers, and agri-holding companies. Look at the village farmers. And what you're going to see over time, acres of land that they use. Look at the size of these farms, almost 8 acres per farm. Wow. Okay, keep these numbers in mind. This one in particular, and this one, as we go from one type of farm to the other. As we then look at those rural village farmers, the most recent data tell me, this is in 2019, those little 7, 8 acre plots produce 34% of all of the food in Ukraine, all of the agricultural production. 30% of the crops and 49% of the livestock. Look back to when they were still coming out of the training with the Soviet Union, and look at what they did. Those small village farmers fed Ukraine, not that good soil that you saw. A lot of those little farms are in poor soil areas, some wet, very thin, all kinds of things, clay rather than that organic stuff that we saw in that picture. Here's some pictures of those family farmers, husband and a wife, bringing home some weeds from the field to feed their cattle. But remember that last picture. Look what they're doing with it. Okay. And then here's very common in all of these rural villages. Family will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cows. And they will all go out that gate in the morning, and somebody in the community will be a shepherd and take them out, and they'll graze the whole herd for the village. And at night, they bring them back in. The cows know where to go, what's the driveway to turn in, and they come in and they're milked. These are these small farmers that we're talking about. And how do they get rid of that produce? Every week, there's a farmer's market in the village or a nearby village. And they take whatever they produce, fruit, vegetables, cheese, milk, whatever. And they take it in, and you can see, they set it up on here. People come in and they buy that. And that's a very big source of income for those rural villages. The private farmers, now look at these numbers. Average acres, a little over 300 acres per private farmer. Again, the numbers, about a third of all of it. Each group has about a third. They have a mix of some dairy farms, some apple farms, some peach farms, some vegetable farms, but on average, they're only 322 acres. Here's one of those private farmers. Look at the machinery he's running. That's a Russian tractor. How many of you can pronounce that? What is it? Anybody? It's pronounced Belarus. After Belarus, you know Belarus, the country. It comes from the country of Belarus in the old Soviet Union. Okay. There's his storage for the grain that he produces on that 320 some odd acres. But notice it's not in the big bins that you see running around as you drive around the country. He's got an old flat bit barn that he had something else. He dumps the grain in there and then stirs it to keep it from being infected, if you will, with insects or whatever, but not very good facilities. Now, the agro holding companies are something else. And this is the thing that these private farmers are worried about. Look at the, again, somewhere around that 11 million acres, about a third of the land. But look at the mean size, the median size, and the range. And I've been on this one, plus some of the other small ones. This farm is running 1.4 million acres of land. And they might be, the people that are running it maybe don't know the first thing about agriculture. They are investment people that actually put together a team of people that manage these farms. And now that 1.4 million is not in one location. These agro holding companies went around and leased the land from these old state farms. Everybody that worked in those villages where there was an old state farm got something like a 25-acre parcel of land. That person's land might be in the middle of a 3,000-acre field. And these agro holding companies came around and rented that 25 acres. In other words, if you were a teacher in the local school in the old state farm, you probably got 25-acre field somewhere. You know where it is, but what can you do with it in the middle of a 1,000-acre field? So these companies went around and rented your land, and your land, and your land, put it all together. And it might be 10,000, 20,000 acres on one farm, but then they went to another part of the country and bought another piece of, but didn't buy, because you couldn't sell land here. Farmland was not for sale. They tried it first when they broke it up in 1991 to really sell this land. And what they soon found out was this. What do you imagine? Who was buying the land? Not the government, the Germans, the French, the English, the Americans, and they said, whoa, we gotta stop this. So they closed it down, and up until this past summer, which is going to be what? 20 years later, 25 years later, you could not sell farmland in the state, in the country of Ukraine, because it was just people with money that would come in and buy it. That doesn't mean that farmland didn't change hands in terms of ownership. Every farmer that I know figures out a way around the government rules. Even in the US, I'm telling you, come on. But what happened in many cases was this. You had your 25 acres. I wanted to rent it, but I knew that maybe you weren't farming it, so I would rent it from you, but I would say to you, wouldn't you like to have some money to buy a new car? Sure. Sure. And so what I would do is make him a loan of some money to do whatever he wanted with it. And it's due, within the next couple of years. You have to pay me back. 2 years comes, you don't have the money. What do?
Renew the note.
No. I go to my friend, the local judge, with a little bit of cash in my hand. And say, this man owes me some money, but he owns some land. What do you think ought to happen? The judge says, okay, the land that he owned, you now own in terms of him not paying him back, but he owes you. That happened more than once across the country. Very, very, like I said, they could get around the rules. But it's a really critical area. Now, here's that big field. This is the way those agri-holding farmers would be. They have the biggest and best equipment. And they have outside money to invest. Look at this one. This is an agri-holding company that built all of these facilities so that all of those thousands and thousands of acres that they either rented or got by default. And this is where they would store all that grain, just like a Midwestern farm, bigger. And the control of that land, that agribusiness or agri-holding, notice, nothing up at the top, is a pension fund from the US. And what do these pension fund people know about running a farm? Not much, but they got the money. So they hired some local people that still were management people, not farmers. And in this particular fund, there was 1.1 million acres of land. Colonel, I've been on that farm. Luxembourg operates that, some group of people from Luxembourg. Cyprus, Russia, Cyprus again. Other foreigners own that 3 million, but down here in Ukraine, there are these are Ukrainian companies now. And look what they're doing. They have the money, and you would call these kind of groups the oligarchs of Ukraine. Money speaks, and they use it in that fashion. Here's where we get into the connection between Ukraine and its importance in the world. Look at the crops, and this is the share of exports has changed. And here we're looking at sunflower, which is this line. Look what's happened to sunflower production or exports, not production, but exports. Okay, percent of the crop, share of world exports. Ukraine has exports something about 60% of the sunflower oil. Wheat down in here, red, and then corn is this green line. Look back here in 91, there was hardly any exported corn. Now, depending upon the year, Ukraine is either the third or fourth largest exporter of corn in the world. Think about that. Third or fourth largest exporter of corn in the world. Okay. And in this year, this was the expectation. 16% of the exports in the world came from Ukraine. Wheat was 12%, barley was 18%, rapeseed was 19% in terms of those seeds. A major port, if you just say to yourself, what if we remove all of this from the world market? What happens to prices? Ooh. And you've already seen it in the stores. This is part of that puzzle. And they're big customers in current years. Europe, China, Middle East, South Korea, and others. if you look at where the grains are produced in Ukraine and say, where do they go? Who depends on them? It's North Africa, it's Middle East, it's Europe, it's China. And they are not going to go hungry. When we short the market, the supply, demand doesn't go away, we raise the price to ration that product, okay? Just keep those things in mind. This was in today's news. March 23rd, war-fueled global hunger catastrophe on the way with solutions tough enough to come by. Without, there is not a solution to this thing, folks. This is going to get worse before it gets better. And that, the same article, disrupted exports, ground refugees feed record high fertilizer prices conspire to an insecure world from a food perspective. Coming at us. We're beginning it, we're not quite there yet. Same, another article. Planted acres, and this came out of the University of Illinois just this morning. Planted acres in Ukraine could fall by 50% this year. Because they did, I got a message yesterday from a good farmer that I've known for many, many years. I've been on his farm probably 15 times. And he says, I need 20,000 gallons of fuel, diesel fuel, to run my equipment to get my crops planted this spring. 20,000 gallons, and all I have is 4,000 gallons. And I don't know where I'm going to get the other. Keep that in mind. This is it's going to show up, and it will show up more in our food supply here, price-wise here in the US. As the grain prices go up, we feed our chickens, our cows, etc. Here, price of all of these animal products are going to rise and have been going. Look at what's happened to the prices of these commodities at the Chicago Board of Trade. Since last November, prices were down here. Comes along, there's some other things happening here, but then over in here, shoo, because Ukraine and Russia are shot out of the market. And that's corn. And Russia does produce a little bit of corn, but not much. And if you go back to the early picture, I can show you where their corn is produced. That's the corn market. There's the soybean market. Taken right up, okay? Just look at the difference in the prices. Last September, we were down in here somewhere around the $12 to $13 mark on the futures. And now we're up closer to 17, 18,000 for 1 bushel of soybeans. Okay. And there's the wheat. This is all in response to this gyration down in here, a little bit of messages about what's going on down in other parts of the world too, but this is the one that as soon as that Russia moved in to Ukraine, the prices of these commodities went sky high. Ukrainian farmland sale reform. This is a big deal in Ukraine, but how it's going to go now, we don't know, because we don't know how this situation is going to end. 1991. That's when those small scale farmers got those 25 acres each from those old state operations. And then farmland was prohibited sale 10 years ago. 10 years after independence, foreigners were buying. I talked about that already. And they didn't want to lose control of their valuable land resource. And then a moratorium. This moratorium ended last summer, but notice the conditions here. Foreigners and foreign companies are prohibited from buying this farmland. A Ukrainian citizen can buy 100 acres. It's about 250 acres. If that individual has money, they can buy it. You got it, I got the money, you'll sell me your 250 acres or whatever. But the agribusiness world, those big farms I talked about with 1 million acres, they can't buy it until 24. And now we don't know what's gonna happen, but that's what the rule is. So anyway, there's a lot going on in Ukraine that's has and will impact our food system in the US and the food system of the world.
I was just saying to my friend Harold, if, the US probably, I don't know, you know this, but produces enough corn and wheat, soybeans, in the US to survive. So why can't we sell to our own country at a price? And if China needs wheat, corn, screw the hell out of them. I mean, let us buy it for $10 a bushel, sell it them for 1,000.
Because it's a world, you live in a global world, you're living in the past.
I am. I am. I'm a conservative. I'm living in old school, I say take care of ourselves, and if somebody wants to take, screw us on the other end, screw them.
You're welcome to it. Try it.
I feel sorry for Ukrainians. I don't know why somebody hasn't stopped this war 2
Oh,
weeks ago.
Well, I know, and that's what most of the world is saying. What's going on? Nobody really, on that front. But anyway, what are they doing to the land? Right now, what the Russians are doing to the land, 2 things. They're focusing on these big agribusiness companies and big farmers, and they're bombing their farm equipment. Okay? The other thing they're doing is in these big fields, say 5,000 acres, they're putting bombs in the ground, dropping these, what do you call them? Bombs that are gonna go off when somebody goes over the ground and hits them. They're dropping these in the good fields. So it's a very difficult situation. And if you don't understand Mr. Putin, you better learn to understand Mr. Putin. Yes.
How much of their corn is used in ethanol production, and might that eventually impact further gasoline prices?
Very little, if any. And there's a lot of discussion in the academic literature that maybe this corn for ethanol is not as good as it seems here in the US in terms of overall economic impact. And it certainly has a result in raising prices. But what it doesn't do is take account of all of those extra soils that were planted to corn, that were marginal soils that really should be in grass. And you take the environmental account of that, put it in terms of an ecological perspective. Everybody's not convinced that ethanol is as good as it's quicked up to be, okay? But that's the non-ethanol producers saying it, and the non-farmers that are saying it, not the farmers.
Isn't there quite an issue too about production of meat and production?
Oh, sure.
Because it's such an inefficient thing, using corn and all that.
Right.
And that's why they're doing artificial meat now, and that's a big thing coming on.
Yeah.
It's a real problem in that.
It is, feeding animals all this grain. When in reality, as California dries up, folks, think about what's going to happen to your fruit and vegetable business in California. Where's it going to have to go? It may have to come back to the Midwest.
GNP for Ukraine versus Russia.
Oh, I don't have the number, but
I mean, percentage, guessing.
I'm guessing that it probably would be 10% of Russia, 10, 15%.
But it's probably one of the more valuable pieces of land available.
Right. There's a reason Ukraine has that nomenclature of being the breadbasket of Europe. And I remember one of the other things I want to note to you, not on this issue, but when I studied this kind of thing in high school, world history, what term did the teachers used when they talked about Ukraine. Did any of you learn this term, the Ukraine? That's the way I learned. It was the Ukraine. And the world spoke about it because they were in the Soviet Union. It's the same way that you and I would say the Corn Belt. The Ukraine was their crop belt because of the difference in moisture and temperature. And now, once in a while, you will hear people say the Ukraine, but that comes out of the old Soviet system. Yes.
Can you speak to the access to the water and how important that is?
The access to water. That's one of the reasons that the Soviet Union wanted Ukraine, was because of that river, the Dnieper River that comes down through there. They created reservoirs of land using it for irrigation because there was not enough water, and they produced Moscow produced their fruits and vegetables and et cetera on those irrigated properties. But what happened was that when the Soviet Union, when Ukraine broke away from the Soviet Union, all of those systems deteriorated. So they had to go back to what quite a quote unquote dry land farming. And that was back to the small grains, wheat, barley, rye, etc. And that hasn't been recovered. Okay. Now, I know that you folks have got to go. Here's my last slide. Read this old limerick here and think of me. So anyway, we're at 1 o'clock. I know you've got other things on your schedule, but this is, somebody introduced me that way one time and I said, well, I can use that now and then. So there it is. Okay.
Thank you very much. I have the mic back.
Oh, sure.
Thank you again. Very timely and interesting and a little sad. And a lot of emotions in there. So thank you. All right. Next week, like I said, we have our rah-rah. Again, I won't go over it, but details are in the newsletter. Looking forward to seeing everybody there. Make sure you register so that we can have somewhat of a semblance of a head count. Yes, there's lots of food here now. So grab some food on your way out. Because I can't eat all that. I don't want to try. All right. And finally, before we wrap up, we have our raffle.
That's the best one we had. We had
$11.
$11.
Oh. Woo, woo.
That's pretty much.
One beer.
The last three numbers are 957.
957. Harry.
Harry. Don't spend this all in one place.
I do spend it all in one place. I just have to get the burger. All right, Bonnie, how much in the ace of spades?
Yeah, who cares? Draw the number.
107.
107. Woo.
Wow. 975. I mean,
Yeah.
977.
Oh,
977.
I was 975. I'm excited. I have to consult the four-way test on that.
Yeah, sure. You noticed with all the phones going off that Russia's been pinging off of us trying to cyber.
Is that what it was, Darren?
Yeah, they were lagging, but it's still good.
9 o'clock. No good. Thanks for playing. All right. 5 after, let's go ahead and wrap up with the 4-way test, as is tradition. I always say repeat after me, but that's not actually what we're doing. So repeat with me of the things we think, say, and do. First, is it the truth? Second,
Is it fair to all concerned?
Third,
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
and fourth.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your week, and we are adjourned.
If you take a meal, sign your name. You need to pay.
And then we just drop off. Just drop off at the end.
No, their price has to be paid.